there, Julie Lancel here from the Pacifica Historical Society and today's host for the Footprints of Pacifica show. As you know, we get together every week to discover and explore the lore and the lore of lovely Pacifica, its character and its characters. The focus of today's show is Mori Point, a beautiful part of our community. But I think we'd all like to know the answer to some questions. How come it is so pristine? How come it is part of the GGNRA now, the National Park? And how come there is no development there? And where did it get its name, Mori Point? We are going to answer these questions with the help of a few guests who have some first-hand knowledge of how this all came to be. Thank you so much. Jerry Crow is joining us, a sometimes host of this program as well, and a member of the Pacifica Historical Society. Thank you so much, Jerry.
Thank you, Julie.
Thanks for coming to share with us today a bit about the history of Mori Point. Why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit of what you know about its history?
Well, Mori Point is the ocean end of that ridge that comes down dividing Valley Mar and Sharp Park sections of Pacifica. It's right at the south end of Sharp Park Beach, kind of nestled in, maybe it was protected from the weather in a way that attracted the Mori family when they first came over from Italy in about 1880. Stefano and Marie Mori took up farming out there. They bought a 19-acre parcel and they also grazed goats and cattle on the surrounding hillsides. Their main crops were those that do well along the coast, the famous artichokes of this area, Brussels sprouts, cabbages, and vegetables of that sort. Marie became locally known as a famous cook. Her artichoke fritters were renowned, and she was also credited with introducing Jack cheese to this part of the coast. And what do you know, here
Wow.
we even today have Jack cheese that we sell here in Pacifica partially to commemorate the Moris and their stay. Well, Stefano and Marie had two sons, Jack and Ray, and I'm not sure when the elder Moris died, but it must have been perhaps somewhere around the 1920s, because we find Jack running the structure that they had built. It started out as a farmhouse and gradually got enlarged to the point where it was 2 stories high. The upstairs was all bedrooms. The downstairs was a huge kitchen and a restaurant area. They began to operate it as Mori's Tavern. They drew people in from far and wide, and particularly during the 1920s when Prohibition had been enacted. It was a famous hot spot, and they always had plenty of booze there. There were 2 Canadian vessels that were devoted exclusively to keeping Moris supplied with the necessary. So they would come in just off the surf line, and Jack Mori had rigged an automobile engine and a cable to help guide their skiffs back and forth through the surf line so the ships didn't have to come in too close and hazard themselves. So they were doing very well until 1923, when there was a huge raid, and something like 24,000 cases of whiskey were supposedly discovered at that point, and I kind of lose track of Jack in the records. The records are pretty meager. Ray had been running a speakeasy over in the Sanchez Adobe at that time. He came back over to run Mori's Tavern. His wife Marie helped him. In time, Ray died, and Marie married a guy named Doug Hart, and they continued to operate the tavern into the 1960s, and then they got in trouble with the health authorities for not keeping the place up, and one thing led to another, and the place supposedly accidentally burned in 1966. So that was the last of the Mori presence here in Pacifica.
I'll be darned. But that name still stays with the property and continues to this day now, doesn't it?
That's right.
Now, there was also some other activity out on Mori Point. I believe it was heavily used for motorcycles, if I'm not mistaken. We have some photos too. Can
That's
you tell
right.
us a little bit about that?
There are a lot of steep slopes there, so it was attractive to motorcyclists. It also had been used during the 50s, and probably during the wartime too, as a source of sand and gravel. We don't have any pictures of that particular operation, but people that hike out there can see some of the old concrete remnants. But the motorcycle clubs were very active, and they planted the numerous pine trees that are still there as a way of concealing some of their activity and keeping the sound from disturbing people, I guess.
Well, you can certainly, you do still see the remnants of that, and even I guess there's even some. Here's a picture of some of the. There is some documentation of use even at this time, although it's certainly discouraged now, and I don't think there are very few people who would want to go out there. But at one time, it was a very, very popular activity. Not only there, but in other parts of Pacifica as well. All right. Well, very good. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was also going to say that Mori Point is dramatic enough terrain that it attracted movie makers at one point. And
that's right.
Those of you who are familiar with a 1971 film called Harold and Maude may remember that Harold had been given a Jaguar by his mother, who wanted him to jazz up his image. But he had a dark side, so he converted it to look like a hearse. And in one of the last scenes of the movie, that hearse is seen driving off the end of Mori Point and ending up upside down in the surf. And you think Harold is in it for a while, but then you see him walking off into the sunset.
Yes, kind of clicking his heels and leaving that part of his life behind, I think, on Mori Point. Now, there's also, what followed during that time was the proposal for the 380 to extend Highway 380, which we know as 380 now on the other side of the hill, but to extend it all the way down into Pacifica. Do you have, what is your knowledge about that? I think actually we have a video that we're going to show of Ferd Simons and Ken Miles talking about that, but did you want to lead into it with any comments?
Well, the idea there, the highway department planned a sort of ladder of freeways where north and south would have Highway 1 on the coast, then 280 and 101 on the bay side. And then the crossbars would be 280 at the north end where it comes across at Daly City. Then 380 would come from the airport directly over to Mori Point, and so on down the coast, 92, 84. It would have been a way different terrain than we see today. If the 380 leg had been finished, it would have been a huge modification to the terrain, because the interchange would have swept around the hills at Mori Point, and it would have been more or less under concrete by now. There would have been, you told me earlier that the overpass was going to be something like 10 stories high. So
it was according to what I heard, that it was an eight lane freeway coming down where, kind of where Sharp Park Road is down that valley, and then crossing Highway 1 on a bridge that was approximately 10 stories, and then sweeping over the western end of Mori Point and coming down into the Rockaway Beach area. So I think we have if I'm not mistaken, we have a video about that. Some interviews with Ferd Simons and Ken Miles, who were actually the part of the environmental group that kind of galvanized around the resistance to 380, and later formed the organization called PUSH, Pacificans United to Save Our Hills. So maybe we can go ahead and see that interview.
PUSH, Pacificans United to Save Our Hills, which was founded many years ago. It was right a little bit after I moved into Pacifica in 1975. I met with numerous members of the community here, including Jan Dutton, who was one of the leaders in the Cattle Hill people that saved Cattle Hill from development. So after a while, there came a threat that the Highway 380 was going to be extended from the airport to 280 and beyond into Pacifica, going over the hills right behind me. Coming down through, I guess, would be the Shell Dance nursery. So the neighbors and ourselves started talking, and many people became very concerned about Highway 380 and what the impact that would be to Pacifica, and that we really wanted to grow that fast and have that impact our lives. So we organized, Ferd Simon, myself, and Jan Dutton met, and we started the push for Pacificans United to Save Our Hills.
It was simply a volunteer association, and the people that came in were people that were interested in open space all along anyway, and this was an opportunity for us to have our own area where we were living included in it. What we mostly were up against were certain people in town that were against reservation of any of the area for anything other than business and tax-inducing activities, which would mean our city would have more money to do some things that we wanted to do. We, in a way, had to buck the opposition all along, and we did that mainly by petitions and going around talking to people and get the support of as many people as we could. And it seemed as if the natural inclination of most of the people in Pacifica was to preserve the hills. And so it wasn't too tough of a job to get signatures on petitions. And it was through that vehicle that we managed to establish the whole idea of open space in Pacifica.
Well, now, welcome back to the show. That was wonderful hearing from some pioneers really in Pacifica with open space protection, Ferd Simons and Ken Miles. Now I want to welcome our second guest, Mike Facey. Welcome, Mike.
It's a pleasure to be here, Julie. Thank you.
Yeah, Mike and I have a history. We worked on this project together, as it turns out, for many years, and I'm really so glad that we're able to be here today and discuss it. Would you like to just talk a little bit about the next steps, and what were the next steps that happened, as pertained to Mori Point once this 380 freeway was defeated? How did things begin to shift with regard to Mori Point?
Right. Well, this is I was kind of represent the person who didn't have a whole lot of knowledge at that time. I was fairly new to town, but what not long after I'd arrived, there was a ballot measure essentially to essentially develop Mori Point and put a 7-story conference center right on the end of Mori Point, and a stable equestrian center, and also a fairly sizable development of houses in what we called the bowl of Mori Point. And like I say, that went to the vote and narrowly won the vote. And so I was really pretty shocked by that, to be honest with you. I looked out over Mori Point from my house on Pedro Point, and I knew a bit about its biology and its importance as a habitat for San Francisco garter snakes and red-legged frogs, and it was pretty stunning to me, basically.
So, and as I recall, like when I arrived in 1986 to Pacifica, what was going on at that point was they were considering, in order to accommodate this development, which did get approved in 1984, this very large development, right. One of the challenges, in addition obviously to the endangered species issues, was the traffic impacts and how that was going to be managed with Highway 1 in the state that it was in at that time, which is not unlike it is today, actually. Right. And so what was going on at that time was a proposal for a very large, once again, highway expansion through the Mori Cut from Fairway Park to Rockaway Beach, called the 1E Modified. Right. And actually I have, here is a photo rendering of what it would have looked like at Mori Point, and I'm going to hold it up. And it was, through the cut at Mori Point, it was 375 feet wide. It had frontage roads. It had off-ramps to Mori Point. It was literally a freeway segment that was going to extend the freeway to Rockaway Beach. And I became part of a coalition of environmentalists and business people who got together to oppose this freeway and present our own proposal, which was called the Pacifica Citizens Proposal for Route 1. And so all these things were kind of coalescing, weren't they? They were coming together. And really in 1988, the council was really beginning to have hearings on an environmental document had finally been prepared on the Mori Point development. And they were going to be having hearings on that. And it was at that point that the public really came out. And I have a little clipping too from that time. It says, Mori Point hearing calm, but controversy is far from over.
That's
really, it was things were beginning to shift at that point, I think.
Yeah, I think it was a memorable council hearing on Mori Point. That was the first time I personally ever actually came before the council, and
yeah, you're quoted actually in the article.
Argued against the development proposal, and you know, it was that combination of both of the traffic issues, as well as the endangered species issues, and of course that was one of my primary concerns, and they really, I think, when this passed in 1984, there wasn't as much knowledge about the effects of, you know, kind of the endangered species issues and things of that nature. But by 1988, it really had come clear. And by the time that council hearing took place, it was like over 50 people arguing against the development, and literally only one person arguing for it. And so it was pretty compelling, I think. I guess, do you want to talk about a little bit about what the council ended up deciding? It was pretty interesting.
Yes, you know, it was. It was very interesting. They in looking at the environmental document and reviewing it, what they ended up doing was approving a partial plan that would include a requirement for additional study of the San Francisco garter snake, and of course getting a permit from the Fish and Wildlife Service before the subdivision of residential and equestrian lots could take place. And so no building permits could be issued for homes in addition until the conference center was built and the equestrian center complex had been approved and construction commenced. So it was, you know, I think the council at that time listened to the regulatory agencies, you know, understood what their responsibility was, and but it was beginning to be a very, very difficult project. And interestingly, there was also a group that formed during that time in opposition called the Pacificans for Mori Point. You know, I just have this is just a letter that went out at that time in 1988 to different folks asking for support for it. In the end, the city, you know, unfortunately, you know, but was being sued simultaneously by the developer and Pacificans for Mori Point.
Right.
It was just it was a very, very tough situation, but it was a struggle for Mori Point and this beautiful property.
Yes.
So I think we now have an interview with Peter Loeb, who was on the council at that time, kind of reflecting on that period. So why don't we go ahead and see that?
There is a lot of open land in Pacifica, and the concern was that it was all going to be proposed for high-density development, like the condo project on Mori Point, which, by the way, is now included in the Golden Gate National Recreation Area. It's part of a national park, as is Sweeney Ridge, as is Cattle Hill, all of which I also consider a significant accomplishment of a lot of people from that time. I'm just one of the players in that game, but over a long period of time, the land that was preserved in permanent open space is what we were about. But at the time of the formation of the Friends of Pacifica organization, it was a specific project on Mori Point that was an issue, but at the same time, people all over town were seeing significant areas of open space that were being targeted, discussed as development sites. So there was a concern about getting control of that, and because at the time it was almost, you could come in with any sort of project on any piece of open land, and there was nothing to really control that. So we were the controlled growth people, what some people refer to as the no-growthers, the negative no-growthers. We've always thought of ourselves as the appropriate growth kind of people.
Well, that was interesting listening to Peter talk about
Yeah.
that. I mean,
Yeah.
I really, I always felt that really what we were trying to achieve is balance in Pacifica between development and open space protection. And when I moved here in '86, I felt I was living in a community that had achieved that, and then felt that it's really important to do everything possible to maintain that as much as possible. And
Yes. It really was good to hear what Peter had to say, and as a new person in town myself, I remember that it really was, I was kind of taken by that the sense that we were at a turning point, that it could have gone either way, and Mori Point somehow symbolized the vision of the community and the direction that we might take, and when the council, whether they intended to or not, the decision really shifted the balance, because without that housing development, they lost momentum essentially, and there were some economic hard times that got thrown in as well. So it kind of led to this impasse, and Mori Point wasn't going anywhere, but looked like nothing was going to happen to it. And for the moment, at least, it appeared that the vision of a Pacifica, a sustainable, livable Pacifica, was intact. And but go ahead. There are some other interesting developments from that.
well,
Since 1988.
yeah, I think what happened is that being frustrated by the economic situation, also probably by not being able to build the homes right away, which were in the species habitat area, and probably just generally frustrated by the whole process, I would imagine. The property was taken over by the investment group that had loaned $10 million actually on the project.
Right.
National Investors Financial. I believe they took control of the property sometime between 1990 and 1992.
Right.
And the property just stayed rather nothing much was happening. I think the person who took over the property, Mr. Lasker, he was the head of the company. He explored other possibilities,
Right.
and then in 1995 he came forth with a very interesting proposal, which was for the largest cardroom casino in Northern California. And in order to have a cardroom casino, there had to be a vote of the people of Pacifica. And I don't know how many people remember this, but I have the headline from the newspaper of September 13th, 1995, and here it is. It says, "Card Club Vote a Go, Special Election December 12th." And this was to put a very large cardroom casino on the end of Mori Point.
Yeah, big carrot for the community to raise a lot of money.
In a difficult time. In a
difficult time,
right.
And yet I think again, this community. Well, I guess you're going to get to the end of that story.
Well, the community it really defeated it soundly.
Yes.
And it did go down, and that was the end of that proposal. And then, it went into a time of thinking about what is going to happen next with Mori
Right.
Point.
Did they go into like a receivership, or what was the legal status after that?
Well, we're going to that property stayed with his firm for many, many years. And
Right.
we're going to be discussing that because this is a large topic and we're not done
Yeah.
and we are running out of time. So it'll have to be continued on our Part 2 show.
The perils of Mori Point.
Yes, exactly.
Part 2.
Right, exactly.
Very
so I just want to say that maybe we could give a little bit of a hint of what is to come. I mean, there were other really troubling things that were happening, of course, during that period. In 1992, there was the recall, which took place, which I know you
Really?
remember.
I don't recall the recall.
And I remember, because I think I took over your position on the council after you got recalled, and then I ran and
Yes.
took your place as the kind of the lone environmentalist,
Yeah.
maybe arguably, but I think I was, and just trying to hold down the fort.
That's right.
Under the storm that was going on at that time, politically, but it was. It was a very difficult time. I should share one other thing that I remember taking place with the new council that took over in 1992. They also voted, and with budget being as challenging, they voted to cut the budget for staff for the Open Space Committee. And that was the committee that was following up on the Open
Right.
Space Task Force recommendations. But Ferd and Clark continued to meet. Despite the fact that it was no longer any staff and
Not staffed.
no support
Yes.
for agendas or anything like that. So those were some dark times, really. It was a difficult time.
Yeah, and they're seminal as well. I mean, just in that period leading up to that, when the Open Space Committee was functional, we had managed to establish a Pacifica Land Trust,
That's correct.
which, just as a teaser, did come to made a pretty important contribution to the fate of Mori Point to be discussed later.
Exactly, and we'll be covering that in Part 2. I want to thank everybody for watching, and we have a little bit more of a video to show, if I'm not mistaken, and I'll keep talking. So anyway, I hope that everyone will tune in to Part 2 of this really interesting show and hear more about what happened next in the fate of Mori Point. And thank you so much, Mike,
Thank
for
you,
coming.
Julie.
I hope you're going to be back
And
for the next
thanks to the
show.
Pacifica Historical Society for, I think having the wisdom to organize this show. I think a lot of people are very curious about it. And
Right,
it's
and don't know
a
the
great
history.
opportunity. Yeah,
That's true.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
So we can...